Welcome to The Exchange. I'm your host, Jeff Goldfarb. Today, we're talking about the Euro crisis and fiscal policy here at home with Bill Rhodes. He's a veteran of the banking industry with over 50 years experience at Citi, as well as the author of the book, Banker to the World. Bill, thanks for being here.
Well, it's great to be here, Jeff.
You've got this new version of the book out. It's got a new intro, fresh intro that looks at the Euro crisis. Should people still be worried about this? What did we learn? Where are we now in the whole scheme of things?
Well, we're going into the fourth year because it blew up when then Prime Minister Papandreou of Greece announced that kind of the books were fixed in December 2009. So we're now into the fourth year of a crisis which European policymakers said really wasn't a crisis. And my concern is that there's a lot of complacency setting in.
Even now?
Even now. And one of the reasons, I think, is that the Europeans, let's say the Eurozone leaders, policymakers, have decided they want to move ahead in three areas. One is to form a banking union, which was originally supposed to be formed by now. They're now talking about the first quarter of next year, hopefully.
Right.
Second is the OMT program, the bond buying program of the European Central Bank, along with the stability mechanism. And we haven't seen a transaction yet because the Spaniards who are interested have not gone along because they don't know what additional conditionality will be placed on them. And they think they're doing enough. And also they want to be convinced that the spreads on their bonds will go down enough that it's worthwhile. And the third leg of all of this, of the stool here, is Chancellor Merkel's push for a fiscal pact to replace Maastricht, which never functioned because the Germans and French immediately violated it. And it was originally supposed to be you could not have a deficit larger than 3% of GDP, and that was going to be the fiscal side to match the monetary union with the European Central Bank.
Is the big problem here that everyone's the coordination isn't there, or is it because everyone's now thinking on their own? What needs to bring everything back together?
I think a sense of urgency. There has not been a sense of urgency here since day one. As a matter of fact, at the IMF World Bank meetings a couple of months ago in Tokyo, I heard the German finance minister say to a small group of us, when asked what was the biggest mistake that he and other policymakers have made in Europe, and what he said was, we all misunderstood, including myself, the dangers of contagion. And I think they have constantly kind of misunderstood the seriousness of the situation, because Europe basically today, not only the Eurozone, but most of Europe with the exception of Germany and a few other countries, Poland, are either in recession or stagnation. So if we want to get back to growth, which is so important in Europe as one of the world's major economies, they've got to have more of a sense of urgency to implement the programs that I mentioned to you.
Let's pivot a little bit to the United States. Increasingly, it seems like Washington is resembling some of the countries that used to be known as third world countries. What's your view of the leadership that was used to get this deficit plan in place and what we've got coming for the next couple months?
Well, I think one of the lessons learned from Europe was that the Europeans didn't want to take the lessons learned from the Latin American debt crisis, the Asian financial crisis, or countries like Turkey and others who had to really adjust their economies, because they said these are developing emerging market economies. We in Europe are developed economies. And that was sort of the idea here, because we have the world's largest economy and we have the reserve currency of the world. So the idea was that none of these lessons apply. But now more and more you hear in Washington, well, we don't want to go the way of Spain or Greece, etc. And so I think the lesson here is that you don't have forever to fix your problems, because they catch up with you, and you need strong leadership. And up to date, we haven't seen that from either party or from the White House.
But the U.S. government has played kick the can for quite a long time. We've argued that the markets are really what's going to end up pushing us. Of when bond investors sort of push them, it doesn't seem like anything else really gets them excited about.
Well, I think that's what will happen, because we have a big deficit. We have to do something on spending. We put a tourniquet around, or a Band-Aid, whatever you want to say, a couple of weeks ago with this arrangement at the year end, but that only bought time. And the markets, at the end of the day, force these issues, just like they did in Europe. And so just having the reserve currency of the world and being the world's largest economy doesn't mean you can escape what the inevitable is if you don't show the leadership.
I'd be remiss not to ask you about the firm that you've been affiliated with now for over 50 years, which is truly extraordinary. There's obviously been some upheaval there, a new CEO. Curious about your thoughts about the direction of Citigroup now under Michael Corbett and with Chairman Michael Neal there. What are your views on the decisions being made?
Well, I think the whole idea, and this started under the last administration with Vikram Pandit, is that we get back to our core businesses. As a matter of fact, Mike Corbett, who I've worked with ever since a merger with Citibank and Travelers, he and I worked together on Latin America. He was the one who was running that area of the bank, Citicorp Holdings, which was basically selling off the non-core assets. So he understands very well what the plan needs to be to continue to sell off those assets, finalize it, and to put the emphasis on the businesses that grow, and particularly in the international and particularly in the emerging markets. I mean, that was basically the culture and the inheritance of Citi. And, you know, at the end of the day, culture counts, as we're finding out with all of these various scandals.
So you're not a believer that Citigroup needs to execute sort of a bigger breakup?
Well, I think you need to get the core franchises. Breaking up is, and we were talking before about mergers, you know, just to do a merger for a merger's sake, which a lot have been done, is the same as breaking up if you don't get anything out of it. So, I mean, I think institutions should be broken up if it's in the interest of the shareholder, the market, the employees, etc. But if it's not, which I think it's not in the case of Citi, you know, once we can get the emphasis back, and I think we're doing that on our real mission, which is our core holdings and the international and the emerging markets.
Let's talk about China. Obviously, new leadership there.
Well, I was there at the end of the leadership change last month, and I'm optimistic that Xi Jinping, who will be the president, he's now head of the party, but he won't take over the presidency till March, and Li, who will be the prime minister, will move, I think, China more rapidly on opening up in a number of areas. I think you're going to see a more rapid opening of the financial sector. I think you'll see a freeing of interest rates. I think you're going to see a move towards convertibility more rapidly than we've seen to date. And very importantly, I think there'll be more emphasis on domestic consumption, because the Chinese have been burned by what's happened in Europe and the United States, because those are the largest trading partners for China. And China was too dependent on exports. So I think you'll see more emphasis on domestic consumption. Now, they have to do a better job on the social safety net to free up savings to allow this to happen. I think you'll see this. I think there are a lot of challenges, but I think this new team will be much more aggressive in reaching these goals. But you have the Party Congress to finalize the transition in March, and once we see that, I think you will see a change. I never thought China was going to get a hard landing. For me, hard landing, and Zhu Rongji, the former premier, always used to say a hard landing is less than 7%. And I always thought they'd get somewhere between 7 and 7.5. It looks like they'll finish this year around 7.5. Next year, I think you'll get 7.5%, 8% growth if they make the changes I mentioned, and I think they will.
What ultimately does that mean for, from an investor standpoint?
Well, I think it's good for foreign investment. I think it's good for the financial sector. I think, as you know, the Chinese are taking this $3 trillion plus reserves, and they're starting to invest worldwide. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to just sit around and hold U.S. treasuries or a sovereign paper. They want it in hard assets, and you see that in what they're doing worldwide, whether it be Africa, Latin America, Canada, Europe, and they would like to do more in the United States. And I think we'll see more of that, more on the investment side going forward.
All right. Bill Rhodes, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I enjoy very much talking with you.
Banker to the World is on sale now. I'm your host, Jeff Goldfarb. We'll see you again soon on another episode of The Exchange.